The Compass in the Attic. Chapter 1, The Compass in the Attic. I hadn't climbed into the attic in years. The old wooden ladder creaked beneath me as I made my way up, one careful step at a time. Dust danced in a narrow beam of sunlight filtering through the small window near the roof, and the air smelled of cedar and age, like the pages of a long-forgotten book. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe I was just following a feeling. A quiet pull in my chest that had been there since I woke that morning. A faint sensation, like the weight of a name I couldn't quite remember. The attic was filled with all the usual things: boxes of letters, a rocking chair with a frayed cushion, and shelves full of trinkets that must have once meant something to someone. I walked slowly, letting my fingers trail along the dusty surfaces. My footsteps were muffled on the thick blanket of time. Then I saw it. A small, circular box made of weathered leather, tucked between two faded quilts. I knelt down and picked it up, brushing the dust away with the sleeve of my sweater. It had no markings, no indication of what might be inside. But the moment my fingers touched it, that quiet pull in my chest grew stronger. I opened the lid. Inside was a compass. At least, it looked like a compass. But instead of cardinal directions, the face bore words I didn't recognize. Not letters, exactly, more like delicate symbols, almost like brush strokes that shimmered slightly when caught by the light. The needle spun lazily for a moment, then settled. Not north. Not anywhere I could name. Just a direction. A path. I held it in both hands and felt a warmth spread through my palms, up my arms, and into my chest. It was subtle, like standing near a hearth on a cold day, not hot but present. Comforting. I should have been surprised. Or curious. Maybe even wary. But instead, I felt only calm. As if the compass had always been meant for me. As if it had been waiting. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor and watched the needle. It didn't waver. Wherever it pointed, it was certain. My eyes followed the direction it indicated, through the wooden beams and the tiled roof, out into a sky I couldn't see. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt folded in that space, as if the ticking of clocks had forgotten the attic altogether. When I finally stood, compass in hand, I knew what I had to do. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I simply walked. The world outside seemed quieter than usual. The trees swayed with a kind of deliberate grace, their leaves brushing against one another like whispers. The clouds moved slowly overhead, drifting like thought. I followed the direction the needle pointed, not questioning, not hesitating. It didn't take me to any roads or trails. Instead, it guided me through fields I hadn't walked in since childhood, through gardens long overgrown, and across streams that reflected skies more dreamlike than real. With each step, a kind of silence grew, not empty, but full. Full of presence. Of memory. Of feeling. And strangely, even though I didn't know where I was going, I didn't feel lost. After a while, I came across an old stone wall, half crumbled, covered in moss. It wasn't tall, maybe waist high, and stretched in both directions until it disappeared into the trees. The compass needle pointed straight through it. Without thinking, I stepped over. On the other side, the world felt slightly different. The colors were softer, as if seen through sheer fabric. The air had a gentler weight. My footsteps barely made a sound on the grass. I paused to take it in. The trees ahead were tall and slender, their bark silvery and smooth. Their branches curled upward like dancers mid-motion. Between them, beams of light filtered through in quiet columns, casting slow-moving patterns on the forest floor. The compass needle didn't budge. I walked on. As I wandered deeper, I passed places that felt oddly familiar, though I knew I'd never seen them before. A patch of lavender beneath a tree with twisting roots. A wooden swing hanging from a low branch, swaying just slightly though there was no breeze. Each scene touched something inside me. Not memories exactly, more like echoes. Like notes from a melody I once knew by heart but had long forgotten. The compass pulsed faintly in my palm, not glowing, not vibrating, just being. Like a heartbeat you only notice when you're perfectly still. I stopped at a clearing where the grass grew thick and soft, almost like a blanket. The sky above was a soft gradient of blue and lilac, and the air was tinged with the scent of rain, though no clouds threatened. I sat down. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to simply be. I don't know how to explain what happened next. There was no flash of light, no voice, no vision. Only a sensation. It was as if the compass had turned inward. For a moment, it felt like I wasn't holding it, it was holding me. Not physically, of course. But gently, firmly, with purpose. Like a memory that knows your name when you've forgotten it yourself. I opened my eyes and looked at the compass again. The needle still pointed forward, but now, something had changed. I couldn't say what. Just that whatever was waiting ahead, it wasn't a place. It was a feeling. A knowing. A gentle calling. Something I'd once held dear. Something I'd lost. Or perhaps, something I'd never realized was missing until now. So I stood once more, holding the compass not as an object, but as a companion. A guide not just across space, but through the quiet rooms of the heart. And as I stepped beyond the clearing, into the woods where the light thickened like honey and the wind spoke only in hushes, I knew this was just the beginning. The compass would lead me. And I would follow. Not to find something, but to remember it. To remember what it meant to long. Chapter 2, The Meadow of Gentle Whispers. The path beyond the clearing unfolded like a ribbon laid gently across the earth. It wasn't a road in the usual sense, no signs, no markers, no stones pressed into place. Just a soft trail where the grass grew lower, as though countless feet had passed before mine, each too light to leave a mark, yet just enough to shape a way. The compass still pointed forward. I held it loosely now, more as habit than necessity. It didn't need to be clutched. It didn't need to be watched. Somehow, I knew it would never mislead me. Not because it knew the destination, but because it knew the direction that mattered. The trees began to thin, their branches growing more horizontal than vertical, reaching outward like open arms. Sunlight poured in, golden and warm, spilling across a wide stretch of meadow that seemed to sigh under the weight of silence. I paused at the edge. The grass here was tall and feathery, swaying even though the wind barely stirred. The air was thick with stillness, but not the kind that weighs. It was the stillness of held breath, of anticipation, of a story about to begin. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not from behind, nor beside me. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. A sound so soft it could have been imagined. A single word, maybe. Or maybe not even a word, but the shape of one. A murmur carried on air too light to feel. I stepped into the meadow. With each pace, the whispers grew, not louder, but fuller. They didn't speak in voices I recognized, and yet they didn't feel foreign. Each one brushed against me like a memory barely out of reach. They said things like, "There you are. You remembered." Almost. But the words didn't demand attention. They didn't insist on understanding. They simply existed, fluttering around me like petals on the breeze. I walked slowly, letting my fingers trail through the tops of the grass. It felt warm to the touch, not wet with dew, not sharp, but yielding. Like it understood I was only passing through. In the distance, a tree stood alone. Its trunk was pale silver, and its leaves shimmered faintly between shades of green and lavender. The compass needle, steady as ever, pointed straight to it. As I drew closer, I noticed something odd. The whispers changed. They weren't general murmurs anymore. They had become familiar. That summer at the lake. The scarf you left on the train. Do you remember the music in the rain? They were pieces. Fragments. Things I hadn't thought about in years, if ever. Some I couldn't place. Some I could feel before I understood them. Like a smell that brings back a moment long gone, these whispers drew emotions out of me without asking questions. I reached the tree and sat beneath its wide, sloping branches. The trunk felt warm against my back, as if it had been touched by sunlight even where the light couldn't reach. The air around the tree was thicker with the whispers, but also gentler, like they respected the boundary of thought and let me breathe in silence when I needed. I closed my eyes. And I listened. They told me stories I had never lived but still knew. A girl in a yellow dress waving at a departing train. A hallway lined with paper stars. A field of snow with only one set of footprints. A book read aloud under the covers, the light of a flashlight flickering with each giggle. Each whisper was brief, like the hush of wind between leaves. And yet, together, they built something whole. Something that felt like the outline of a longing I hadn't yet named. I found myself breathing in rhythm with them, as though the meadow and I shared the same lungs. One whisper brushed especially close. You were loved, even when you didn't know it. It passed like mist. But it stayed. When I opened my eyes again, the sky had deepened. It wasn't dark, just richer. The blue held more weight, like a dusk that had no rush to fall. The shadows had grown longer, stretching softly across the meadow in thin ribbons. The compass in my lap pulsed once. I looked down. The needle hadn't moved, but the face seemed calmer. The symbols glowed faintly, like they were breathing too. The whole device seemed less like a tool and more like a reflection of me, perhaps. Of the journey. Of something waiting. I stood, brushing grass from my clothes. As I turned to go, the whispers hushed, together, as one. And in their quiet, a final murmur lingered behind. Not everything you long for is lost. I walked on. The path ahead was framed by tall grasses and low-humming flowers, their petals fluttering not in wind, but in recognition. The air was cooler now, tinged with the earthy scent of evening. The trees ahead were darker, their outlines soft and velvet-like against the sky. The compass felt warmer in my hand. And in my chest, that quiet pull remained, still calm, still steady. It didn't urge me. It didn't chase me. It simply beckoned, like a distant light glimpsed through fog. And I followed. Because I had begun to understand something. Longing wasn't emptiness. It was a thread. And I was following it, not to fill a void, but to trace its shape, to remember where it began. And maybe, just maybe, to find where it led. Chapter 3, The River That Remembers. The forest grew denser as I walked, but not darker. Light filtered through the branches in threads of silver and gold, weaving patterns on the ground that shifted with each breeze. Leaves whispered above me, their rustling barely louder than breath. The path narrowed, bordered by ferns and flowering vines that leaned gently in, as if curious about my passing. The compass remained steady in my palm. It was strange, how natural it felt now to follow its silent direction. I no longer checked it out of uncertainty but held it like a companion, the way one might carry a letter not yet read, or a photograph whose edges were soft from being touched too often. The air changed before I saw the river. It became cooler, moister, carrying the scent of stone and water and something else, something older, deeper. I could hear the sound long before I reached the banks, a quiet rushing, not forceful, but ceaseless. A sound like thoughts that never stopped. When the trees opened at last, they revealed a gentle river winding through the landscape like a ribbon of melted glass. Its surface shimmered with reflections that didn't quite match the sky above, clouds in unfamiliar shapes, birds that didn't fly past overhead, and flashes of color that felt like they belonged to other seasons. The compass needle pointed directly across it. But I didn't cross. Not yet. Instead, I sat by the edge, near a smooth patch of stone half submerged in the water. The current was slow here, curving around the bend with a grace that made the whole river feel alive. I dipped my fingers into the cool stream. The moment my skin touched it, the river responded. Not with ripples, but with something else. A scene unfolded across its surface, soft, transparent, like a reflection layered over reality. It was me. Younger. Smaller. Sitting on a porch in summer light, holding a book with pages turned by the wind. My legs swung just above the wooden floorboards, and beside me, someone sat with a hand resting gently on my head. A voice, faint, unplaceable, read the words aloud. I couldn't make them out. But I remembered how they felt. Warm. Safe. Loved. The vision dissolved as the current moved on, the water reclaiming its ordinary shimmer. I pulled my hand back, staring at my damp fingers as if they held the memory within them. Another breeze passed. The river whispered again. Tentatively, I reached down once more. This time, the image was different. A winter scene. Snow falling in slow spirals. A walk along a fence line, my boots crunching quietly beneath me. I was alone, but not lonely. The stillness had been welcome, a rare kind of peace that only comes when the world is wrapped in white and soundless. And then a laugh. Mine. Falling upward like frost caught in sunlight. I began to understand. The river didn't show what I wanted to see. It showed what I needed to remember. Not moments of drama, or turning points, but quiet ones. Glimpses of the essence of me, the shape of my longing, the gentle threads I'd forgotten I was made of. I lay back on the stone, letting my hand trail in the water. I didn't try to force it anymore. I simply let the river flow. And the memories came, soft as falling petals. The smell of cinnamon from a kitchen at dusk. The hush of a museum room with a single painting dot. A smile exchanged on a train platform, brief and unspoken dot. The feeling of being seen, really seen, for the very first time. None of them had been extraordinary. And yet, they were everything. The river whispered to me, not in words, but in waves of presence. It told me that not all things that matter are loud. That some truths arrive quietly, gently, like water smoothing stone. The compass pulsed once in my hand. I looked down. The needle had shifted, not far, just slightly to the right. A subtle curve in the journey. It was time to go. But I lingered just a little longer. I bent down and cupped my hands into the stream, letting the cool water run over my palms. Then I touched it to my face, not to wash, but to carry something of it forward. A baptism, perhaps, not in the name of change, but remembrance. When I stood, the forest across the river waited in silence. There was no bridge. But as I stepped forward, a series of flat stones emerged from the shallows, rising just enough to carry me across. I smiled. Of course they would. I crossed slowly, the river's song continuing beneath me, quiet but constant. Each step felt like walking over the spine of a great, sleeping story. When I reached the other side, I paused once more to look back. The river shimmered, then stilled. The visions faded. But the feelings remained. Carried not in my hands, but in the quiet corners of my heart. Beyond the river, the trees gave way to open space. The path curved upward, just slightly, leading toward a horizon tinged with rose and amber. The compass felt light in my hand now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I understood something new. Longing wasn't just about what was missing. It was also about what had been. The gentle ache of beauty once held, the echo of a laugh, the shadow of a touch. These were not losses, but traces. And the compass knew to follow them, not to reclaim, but to remember. Because in remembering, I became whole. I walked on, the river at my back, the light ahead. And in the space between the two, I felt a stillness deeper than silence. A stillness that said, "You are not lost. You are becoming." Chapter 4, The Lantern Maker's Town. The land sloped downward now, gently, like a deep breath slowly let go. The trees thinned once more, and in the distance, I began to see faint glimmers, like stars scattered across the earth instead of the sky. At first, I thought they might be fireflies. But as I drew closer, I realized they were lanterns. Hundreds of them. They lined the narrow path ahead, suspended from curved wooden poles, their light golden and soft, like the warmth of old memories. Each one swayed slightly, even though there was no breeze, and the glass of their enclosures was etched with delicate designs, clouds, feathers, keys, and once, I think, a single tear. The compass needle pointed straight down this glowing corridor. And so, I walked. The town revealed itself slowly. It didn't announce its presence with stone gates or signs. Instead, it unfolded like a dream recalled in pieces. Small houses with round windows and sloping roofs. Gardens blooming with silver-petaled flowers. Narrow streets paved not with bricks, but with smooth, flat river stones that clicked softly underfoot. It was quiet, but not empty. I saw them, residents, perhaps, moving gently through the light. They wore robes in soft colors and walked with calm purpose, carrying tools, spools of wire, fragments of glass. Everyone seemed to be in the middle of making something, and yet, no one appeared rushed. One figure stood near a low workbench, turning a piece of glass over in their hands. Another adjusted the wick of a lantern with a careful twist of fingers, their expression serene. No one looked up at me. And yet, I didn't feel unwelcome. It was as if they already knew I would come. As if they'd always known. I followed the path until it opened into a wide square. At its center stood a tall iron structure, something like a tree made of metal, with outstretched branches from which dozens of lanterns hung. Each one glowed with a different hue, pale blue, gentle amber, deep rose, and together, they cast a moving mosaic of light onto the stones below. Around the square were more lantern makers at work. Children sat in small circles, threading wires through colored glass, their faces lit from below. Elderly figures polished curved mirrors with cloths that shimmered. No one spoke. And yet, the silence felt full. Then, I saw the lantern. It was hanging from a wooden arch near the edge of the square. Unlike the others, it wasn't glowing. But it pulsed. Faintly, like a heart just waking. And on its glass sides, there were shapes, not etched or painted, but shifting. A pattern that moved with my gaze. I stepped closer. Inside the lantern, I saw something that stopped me. A memory I hadn't thought of in years. It was a room I had known once. A quiet place with a large window and faded curtains. A desk by the wall, covered in scattered papers and half-drunk tea. And there, on the chair by the window, sat someone. Their face was unclear. Not blurred, just distant. But I felt it. That warm, aching sense of connection. It wasn't a memory tied to an event. It was a feeling. Of being understood. Of being seen. Of being held, not in arms, but in attention. A gentle voice interrupted my reverie. "You found it," someone said beside me, quiet as wind through reeds. I turned. A figure stood there, older, with hair like silver threads and eyes like dusk. Their robe was a soft shade of rust, and their hands were speckled with flecks of light. "Found what?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Your lantern," they said simply. "It's made from your longing." They stepped closer, their gaze soft. Not all longings are for things. Some are for feelings. For truths. For versions of ourselves we left behind. I nodded, the weight of their words settling gently within me. "How did it get here?" I asked. The lantern maker smiled. "Everyone who follows the compass brings a fragment. A sliver of feeling, of memory, of yearning. Here, we help it take shape. You brought yours, even if you didn't know it." They gestured toward the lantern. "Would you like to light it?" I hesitated. Then I reached out, placing my hand on the curved glass. It was cool. Then warm. Then still. A soft glow began at its center, growing slowly, tenderly, until the entire lantern pulsed with gentle golden light. Not bright. Not blazing. But steady. Certain. The lantern maker nodded. "It remembers you." They led me to a small bench near the edge of the square, beneath an overhang draped in vines. We sat together in silence for a while, watching as others passed, some placing new lanterns, others polishing old ones. A few simply stood beneath the hanging lights, eyes closed, breathing slowly. I turned to them after a time. "What happens now?" The lantern maker looked at the sky, now tinged with twilight violet. "You carry the light," they said. "Not in your hands. Not in your bag. But within. They placed a small charm in my palm, a tiny replica of the lantern I had just lit. To remind you, they said, that what you long for is not separate from you. It lives inside you, glowing quietly, waiting to be remembered. I left the square as night settled. The path ahead was lit not by lanterns, but by stars now, real ones, above and around me. The sky opened wide, soft and velvet, and I felt no fear, no hurry. Just a calm movement forward. The compass, still warm in my hand, pulsed once and turned. A new direction. I followed. And behind me, though I could not see it, I knew. A lantern glowed with the light of everything I had once thought lost. And everything I had always carried. Chapter 5, The Field of Echoes. The path after the lantern maker's town led me into stillness deeper than any I had yet known. The stars above no longer blinked with cold distance, they hung closer now, larger and softer, like lanterns in the sky, echoing the ones I'd left behind. My footsteps made no sound, not because the world was silent, but because it listened. And I had begun to listen, too. The compass guided me through low hills veiled in silver mist, where the grass shimmered as if sprinkled with stardust. Each blade swayed in slow motion, like time itself had slowed to watch me pass. I felt no hurry. I barely felt the need to breathe. Everything I needed was already here. Eventually, the hills opened. Before me stretched a vast open field, quiet and pale beneath the moonlight. It was ringed by tall, dark trees whose branches bowed inward as though leaning to hear. The grass here was lower, like it had been flattened gently by voices rather than feet. And in the middle of that field, though I saw nothing, I heard everything. It began with a whisper. Not words, not even sound. A memory, only half-formed, unfolded in the air beside me, as though the wind had been carrying it for years and had finally found its listener. Do you remember the way your heart felt that day? A voice that sounded like mine, but younger. Then another. You used to hum that melody when you were alone. And another. You promised not to forget. And here you are. I took a slow step forward. The echoes multiplied. They didn't overlap or crowd. They waited patiently for their turn, each one arriving with the softness of a falling leaf, brushing my thoughts and dissolving before I could hold on to them. They weren't from others. They were from me. Versions of myself long past, forgotten in the rush of years, buried beneath the noise of living. Here, in this field, they returned. Not as ghosts, but as echoes. And they had no blame. No sorrow. Only presence. One voice laughed. A small, surprised sound. You used to talk to the stars, remember? I smiled. I did. Another murmured. You loved the sound of pages turning, more than the stories themselves. That, too, was true. And then. You were once afraid of silence. But now, look. I did look. Around me, the field shimmered faintly. Echoes rose from the ground like warmth from stone, memories not of what happened, but of how it felt. Of being small and wondering if I mattered. Of being older and forgetting that I did. Of waiting for someone to say I was enough. And of slowly learning that no one else had to. I sat in the center of the field, cross-legged, eyes half closed. The compass rested in my lap. It no longer pulsed. It didn't need to. This place, it wasn't a destination. It was a mirror. Here, in the hush of the field, I heard the fullness of who I had been. Not in a single moment, but in the slow layering of time. Each echo added a brushstroke, a note, a breath. Together, they formed something complete. Something gentle. Something whole. The wind changed. Not in temperature or strength, but in feeling. It carried something now. Not echoes, but a single, quiet call. It came from far across the field, past the mist, where the starlight gathered thicker than anywhere else. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was longing. Pure, undiluted, like the scent of rain before it falls. The compass glowed faintly once more. The needle turned. And I stood. I walked across the field without fear. Each echo I passed faded not into silence, but into me, folding into my breath, my bones, my steps. I carried them with me now, not as burdens but as light. And ahead, where the mist cleared, I saw it. A gate. Not grand. Not carved. Just two wooden posts and a beam across the top, standing quietly at the field's far edge. No door. No lock. But it felt like a threshold. A passage between what had been and what awaited. As I stepped through the gate, the compass grew warmer. The air felt different, richer, deeper, like the color blue made into sound. And though I didn't know what I would find next, I wasn't afraid. Because in the field of echoes, I had remembered myself. Not all of me, but enough. Enough to know that what I longed for was not out of reach. It had been calling to me all along. Not with shouts, but with whispers. And now, I could finally hear them. Chapter 6, Where the Compass Rests. Beyond the gate, the landscape changed once more. It wasn't sudden. It didn't startle. It simply unfolded, like the slow turning of a page in a long-loved book. The air grew denser, not heavy but full, like a quiet breath held in anticipation. The light softened further, as though the world was now lit from within rather than above. And the path, it was no longer a path. It was presence. A space between moments. I walked without knowing if my feet touched the ground. The mist clung low, but not cold. It swirled gently around my legs and rose to my shoulders, wrapping me in its hush. Above, stars shifted into constellations I didn't recognize, and yet, I felt they recognized me. The compass, warm in my palm, pulsed only once. Then, it went still. I stood on a hill that overlooked a valley of quiet light. There was no village, no lanterns, no signposts. Only the gentle rhythm of something resting beneath the earth. A pulse that echoed my own. And I knew. This was where the compass had always been leading me. Not to a person. Not to a place. But to a truth. A quiet one. A sacred one. The kind that doesn't need words to be known. I sat on the hilltop, cross-legged, as I had in the attic. As I had by the river. As I had in the meadow. The compass rested in my lap. It no longer pointed. It had brought me to the place where pointing was no longer needed. And in the stillness, something rose within me. Not a voice. Not a thought. A memory, not of the past, but of the self I had always been beneath everything I had forgotten. I closed my eyes. And I listened. I heard silence first. Then, I heard the shape beneath it. A steady rhythm. My own heartbeat. And beneath that, the echoes of every step I had taken, through light and mist, through lantern-lit streets and whispering fields. Each step had been a question. And now, each silence was an answer. I let it fill me. I let it settle like dusk over water. Time did not pass, and yet, I felt something shift. The compass, resting in my lap, began to glow, not with light, but with understanding. Its glass became transparent. Its needle, motionless. Its face, blank. And in that emptiness, I saw everything. I saw the longing that had led me here, not as a weakness, but as a path. A thread spun from all the quiet moments I had once ignored. A glance I wished I had held a second longer. A name I whispered only in dreams. A melody that made me ache without knowing why. They were not pieces to be fixed. They were the map itself. I opened my hand. The compass lifted gently, as though released by gravity itself. It hovered above my palm, glowing softly. Then, like ash caught on wind, it began to dissolve. First the outer ring. Then the glass. Then the needle. And finally, the light. It drifted upward, slowly, reverently, until it disappeared among the stars above. And in its place, I felt only one thing. Peace. Not the peace of endings, but the peace of recognition. I stood once more. There was no need to go back. There was no need to go forward. But still, I walked. Not because I was searching, but because I had become the journey itself. And everywhere I stepped, the ground welcomed me. The trees leaned to listen. The stars blinked with quiet joy. And though the compass was gone from my hand, I felt it pulsing now in my chest. Not as an object, but as a knowing. A direction that no longer needed pointing. Eventually, I came to a small clearing. There was no monument. No shrine. Just a single stone, half buried in moss, shaped like a heart not carved by hands, but by time. I sat beside it. Not to rest, but to be. And in the quiet that followed, I finally understood. Longing is not emptiness. It is connection stretching across time. It is the shape of the soul calling itself home. And when we follow it gently, without forcing, without naming, we arrive not at answers, but at presence. I lay back against the grass. The sky above shimmered as if watching. And in that final breath before dreams, I heard one last whisper. You are exactly where you were always meant to be.